All right, let's talk about something that's really changing the game for anyone dealing with dizziness or balance problems. We're going to break down a framework that's flipping the old way of thinking on its head and showing us a much smarter way to get people back on their feet. Let's get right into it.
So, let's start with a question that I bet a lot of you have thought about, whether you're a patient or a clinician. Why does balance therapy sometimes feel like you've just been handed a random list of exercises? Like a checklist that doesn't really feel connected to what's going on. What's behind that, and is there a better way?
Well, a big part of the problem usually comes down to the old-school diagnosis-first approach. You get a label, right, like vestibular hypofunction, and boom, out comes a standard playbook of exercises. But that one-size-fits-all method, it can completely miss what's really causing the problem.
And this, right here, is the light bulb moment. The FYZICAL framework basically says, hey, that medical label, it's not the whole story. The real issue is functional. It's all about how your brain is handling information, or more specifically, when it's getting its wires crossed in what we call a sensory mismatch.
Okay, so if the problem is this sensory mismatch, then the solution needs a totally new playbook. And to get it, you first have to meet the key players. I want you to think of your brain's balance system as a super skilled team that's always on the job. This team is made up of 3 and only 3 critical sensory systems. They're all constantly talking to your brain, feeding it information to keep you steady and upright. And the team members are pretty simple to understand. First up, you've got vision, what your eyes see. Then there's the vestibular system, which is that amazing gyroscope inside your inner ear that senses motion. And finally, the somatosensory system, which is all the feedback coming from the ground up through your feet and your joints. When these 3 are talking to each other perfectly, you feel solid. When they're not, that's when you feel dizzy, unsteady, and just off.
And that brings us right to the heart of it, the sensory mismatch. It's nothing more than a communication breakdown in the team. Your brain either gets conflicting reports from its players, or it starts to trust one player way too much and ignores the others. This is the root problem we need to fix.
So how do we fix it? This is where the magic of the framework comes in. It doesn't just say, oh, there's a mismatch. It actually pinpoints the exact type of communication breakdown that's happening, and that lets us be incredibly specific with the therapy. Let's see how that works. Okay, here are 2 classic examples you'll see all the time. On one hand, you have a Visual-Vestibular Mismatch, or VVM. That's when the brain is just leaning way too hard on what the eyes are seeing. On the other hand, you have a Somatosensory-Vestibular Mismatch, or SVM. That's when the brain is over-relying on information coming from the ground. See? Totally different problems, and they need totally different solutions. Let's make this super real. Imagine a patient with VVM. They're the person who feels awful in a busy supermarket or gets dizzy just scrolling on their phone. Why? Because their brain is overwhelmed by all that visual motion. So the treatment goal is actually really logical. You give them a nice, stable surface to stand on, something solid, and then you carefully start challenging their visual system. You're basically teaching the brain to calm down and not overreact to what it sees.
Now let's flip that coin. An SVN patient is totally different. They're rock solid on a sidewalk, but the second they step onto grass or a plush carpet, they feel wobbly. Their brain is trusting their feet too much. So the treatment is the complete opposite. We give them something stable to look at, and we start challenging the surface under their feet, maybe by having them stand on foam. We're forcing the brain to stop listening only to the feet and to start trusting its other senses again.
And this quote from Brian Werner just hits the nail on the head. It's all about sensory reweighting. It's not just about making muscle stronger, we're literally retraining the brain, teaching it how to rebalance its trust across all 3 senses so they can work together efficiently, just like they're supposed to.
Okay, so you've found the mismatch. Now what? How do you actually move forward? Well, this is not guesswork. The framework gives us a clear, step-by-step path that's guided by 5 simple but really powerful rules.
Think of these as the rules of the game. You're always working on both standing still and moving, but you don't push someone to the next level until they've gotten every last bit of benefit from the current one. That's key. It prevents them from getting overwhelmed. And the most important rule, number 5, you always stay inside the patient's specific mismatch. Every single exercise has to directly address their brain's communication problem. No random movements, no wasted effort.
So when you pull this all together, it becomes crystal clear why this is such a huge leap forward. Treatment stops being generic and becomes what it should be, totally personalized, progressive, and incredibly precise. And this takes us right back to where we started, doesn't it?
This framework completely solves that problem of the random exercise list. It throws it out the window and replaces it with a smart, logical, step-by-step plan where every single thing you do has one purpose: to rewire the brain's sensory computer.
So if you remember anything, remember this: getting the mismatch right from day one is everything. After that, you're just intelligently using one sense to help another, like using a solid floor to loan the brain some stability while you challenge the eyes. It makes the whole thing individualized, driven by data, not just a recipe. And the result? Recovery is faster and it's far more effective.
And that kind of leaves us with a really big final thought. This is way bigger than just balance. This whole framework points to a massive idea. What if the future of all kinds of recovery isn't about treating a label you've been given, but about understanding and retraining the very senses our brain uses to make sense of the world? Something to think about.